I thought Mexico would be insanely cheap, but I was completely wrong. Mexico is often promoted as one of the cheapest places for Americans to move to. But after living here myself, I realized the reality is a lot more complicated than people online make it seem. Using insights from the Earth Awaits, Numbeo, and livingcost.org, we break down the most common mistakes Americans make after moving to Mexico. Stick around to the end to understand the one assumption about the country that I got completely wrong. You can live in Mexico for just $1,200 a month sounded so convincing that I almost believed my financial problems were solved. Before moving, I watched dozens of YouTube videos promising an affordable paradise. Every thumbnail had some variation of the same claim. Live cheaply in Mexico, luxury for less, or how I survive on $1,200 a month. At first, it felt exciting. The numbers looked real, the apartments looked beautiful, and the creators spoke with so much confidence that it was easy to believe I could dramatically cut my expenses while upgrading my lifestyle at the same time. But the deeper I got into actually living in Mexico, the more I realized something important. There's a massive difference between backpacker living and real life living. A lot of those budget videos are made by travelers staying temporarily in ultra cheap hostels, splitting rent with roommates, eating street tacos every day, and constantly moving around before hidden costs catch up to them. That's not the same as building an actual life somewhere. Real life living means stable housing, reliable internet, transportation, healthcare, groceries, emergencies, furniture, visa runs, and wanting a safe neighborhood you genuinely enjoy living in long term. The problem is that cheap travel content doesn't reflect long-term living. A 2-week vacation budget is completely different from sustaining a comfortable lifestyle month after month. The moment you stop thinking like a tourist and start thinking like a resident, the math changes fast. I remember finding an apartment online that looked perfect and affordable until I learned utilities weren't included. The internet was unreliable, and the cheap neighborhood came with trade-offs nobody mentioned in the videos. Suddenly, my carefully planned monthly budget started stretching further and further beyond what I expected. And honestly, this was the first mistake that started breaking my budget. Because once your expectations are built around unrealistic numbers, every unexpected expense feels like failure, even when the reality is simply more complicated than YouTube makes it seem. I thought moving to Mexico automatically meant my cost of living would drop, no matter where I chose to live. That assumption disappeared almost immediately when I started looking at the places I actually wanted to live in. Like a lot of Americans, I wasn't dreaming about moving to a quiet local neighborhood far from everything. I was looking at the beach towns, the trendy expat neighborhoods, and the beautiful tourist zones I kept seeing online. Places with rooftop cafes, walkable streets, modern apartments, co-working spaces, and ocean views that looked straight out of a travel vlog. The problem was, everybody else wanted to live there too. The moment I started searching in popular areas like beach destinations and highly sought after expat communities, the prices looked nothing like the cheap Mexico people kept talking about online. Rent jumped fast. Cafes charged US level prices. Imported groceries cost more than expected. Even simple things like gym memberships, transportation, and dining out suddenly felt far less affordable when multiplied across an entire month. What I slowly realized is that there are really two versions of Mexico people talk about online. There's the local version, where many residents live on far lower wages and budgets. And then there's the expat version, built around foreign demand, tourism, convenience, and lifestyle upgrades. And if you choose the second one, your expenses can rise shockingly fast. I remember sitting at a trendy cafe one afternoon, looking around at the digital nomads, influencers, and remote workers filling the space. Everyone talked about escaping expensive American cities, yet many of us were still spending heavily, just in a different country. That's when the realization finally hit me. I wasn't paying Mexico prices. I was paying expat prices. And that distinction changed everything. Because the lifestyle I imagined, living near the beach, eating at aesthetic cafes, staying in safe, walkable neighborhoods, and surrounding myself with modern conveniences, came with a premium nobody fully explained beforehand. Yes, Mexico can absolutely be affordable, but the version most foreigners dream about often costs more. Stick around to see what recreating an American lifestyle in a foreign country can turn into. The fastest way I accidentally made life in Mexico expensive was by trying to make it feel exactly like home. At first, I didn't even notice I was doing it. I told myself I was simply trying to stay comfortable while adjusting to a new country. So instead of adapting to local habits, I kept reaching for the same routines I had back in the United States. I searched for Western-style apartments with modern appliances, strong air conditioning, filtered water systems, fast Wi-Fi, and furniture that looked familiar. The apartments were beautiful, but they were also priced for foreigners like me. Then came the groceries. I started filling my cart with imported snacks, American brands, protein products, almond milk, and specialty foods I recognized from home. What shocked me wasn't just the price, it was how quickly those small purchases added up. Items that seemed normal in the US suddenly carried import markups, premium pricing, or limited availability. Meanwhile, many affordable local products sat untouched because I kept choosing familiarity over adaptation. And honestly, convenience became its own expensive habit. Food delivery apps, ride shares, co-working spaces, international cafes, subscription services, and online shopping slowly became part of my routine. None of it felt outrageous individually, but stacked together month after month, they quietly transformed my supposedly affordable lifestyle into something much more expensive than I planned for. I remember one moment standing in a grocery store, looking at the total on the checkout screen and realizing I was spending nearly the same amount I used to spend back home. That was the moment the truth finally clicked for me. The more I tried to feel like I was back home, the more expensive life became. Because living affordably in Mexico often requires embracing the country for what it is, instead of constantly comparing it to where you came from. The people who thrive long-term usually adapt to local rhythms, local products, and local expectations. But when you constantly chase American comfort in another country, you often end up importing American expenses too. What really surprised me about living in Mexico wasn't one giant expense. It was the endless stream of tiny ones that slowly drained my budget. At the beginning, everything felt affordable compared to the United States. A coffee here, an Uber there, cheap tacos after a night out. None of it seemed worth stressing over. In fact, that's exactly how I justified most of my spending. I kept telling myself it's still cheaper than back home. But that mindset became dangerous fast. I started spending more time working from cafes because the atmosphere felt relaxing and productive. What began as a simple coffee run slowly turned into daily spending on drinks, pastries, snacks, and meals. Then came the delivery apps. Ordering food felt incredibly convenient, especially on busy days, and the delivery fees initially looked small enough to ignore. But after weeks of constant orders, I realized I was spending far more than if I had simply cooked at home more often. Then there were the Ubers. At first, rides were cheap enough that I stopped paying attention to them. Instead of walking or learning public transportation, I relied on ride shares constantly because they felt easy and affordable in the moment. But multiple rides every day added up quickly across an entire month. And honestly, the social lifestyle made it even easier to overspend. Living in popular expat and digital nomad communities meant there was always something happening. Dinners, cafes, co-working meetups, beach trips, rooftop bars, weekend events. The lifestyle felt exciting, and compared to US prices, everything seemed reasonable. But reasonable spending, repeated every single day, eventually stops being reasonable. I remember reviewing my bank statements one night and feeling genuinely shocked. None of the charges looked huge individually, but together they painted a completely different picture than the budget I originally planned. That's when I realized the truth. The little expenses felt harmless until they became my entire budget. And in many ways, that's what makes overspending in Mexico so deceptive. The lifestyle feels affordable right up until you total everything together. Keep watching to find out the folly of moving to another country without testing the waters first. I almost locked myself into a version of life in Mexico that looked perfect online but felt completely wrong in reality. Like a lot of people dreaming about moving abroad, I got emotionally attached to the idea before I fully understood the day-to-day reality. I watched cinematic YouTube videos, scrolled through beautiful apartment tours, and imagined myself living this peaceful, affordable lifestyle near the beach. Everything felt exciting, and because I was so eager to start fresh, I rushed decisions I probably should have slowed down on. The biggest mistake was signing a long lease too early. I convinced myself that locking in an apartment quickly would save money and reduce stress. But after settling in, I started noticing problems I never considered beforehand. The internet wasn't reliable enough for work. The heat felt exhausting after a few weeks. The neighborhood that looked vibrant during vacation mode felt noisy and overwhelming during regular daily life. And suddenly, instead of feeling free, I felt trapped in a place I barely knew. Then came the realization that I may have chosen the wrong city fit entirely. What sounds ideal on paper doesn't always match your personality or lifestyle long term. Some cities are amazing for short-term travel, but difficult for routine living. Others may look boring online, but actually provide a much better quality of life once the excitement wears off. I didn't fully understand that distinction until I was already committed. And honestly, a lot of my decisions were emotional. I wanted escape, adventure, and the feeling of reinventing my life. So instead of slowly testing different areas first, I treated the move like a dramatic life reset. That emotional excitement made me overlook practical questions about comfort, work routines, social life, climate, safety, and sustainability. Looking back, this became one of the most expensive lessons I learned. I committed to a lifestyle before I understood what daily life actually felt like. Because visiting Mexico for a few exciting weeks is very different from building an ordinary life there month after month. And if you move too fast, you may end up paying heavily to undo decisions you made emotionally instead of realistically. Make sure to watch all the way through to find out what the difference is between being cheap and having financial freedom. The biggest financial illusion I fell for in Mexico was thinking that lower prices automatically meant financial freedom. At first, everything felt incredibly affordable compared to life in the United States. Meals were cheaper, transportation was cheaper, rent seemed cheaper, and even entertainment felt more accessible. That difference created a dangerous sense of comfort in my mind. I stopped thinking carefully about spending because almost every purchase felt small enough to justify. And that's exactly where things started going wrong. Instead of saving more money, I slowly started spending more simply because prices appeared lower. I ordered extra food because it wasn't that expensive. I said yes to more trips, more dinners, more cafes, and more weekend activities because everything felt like a bargain compared to American prices. Individually, none of the purchases looked irresponsible, but together they quietly created an entirely new lifestyle I hadn't originally budgeted for. That's when lifestyle inflation started creeping in. The longer I lived in Mexico, the more normal those upgraded habits became. A nicer apartment didn't feel extravagant anymore. Daily delivery apps felt routine. Frequent social outings felt deserved. And because the numbers still looked cheaper than the US, I kept convincing myself I was being financially smart, even while my actual savings weren't improving much at all. I remember checking my finances one month, expecting to feel proud about how much money I'd saved abroad. Instead, I realized I had simply recreated another version of expensive living in a different country. That realization hit hard because the truth was simple. Lower prices made me less disciplined, not more financially secure. And honestly, that was one of the most unexpected lessons about living in Mexico. Cheap environments can sometimes encourage more spending instead of less, especially when every purchase feels psychologically easier to justify. Financial freedom doesn't come from moving somewhere cheaper alone. It comes from maintaining discipline, intentional habits, and realistic expectations no matter where you live. Otherwise, your spending simply expands to match your new environment, even if the country itself is technically more affordable. You'll want to see what happens when you ignore long-term sustainability living abroad. It's surprisingly easy to feel financially lost in Mexico, even while living somewhere that's supposed to be cheap. For a while, I convinced myself everything was fine because I wasn't completely running out of money. I was still paying rent, still going out, still enjoying the lifestyle I'd dreamed about, but underneath all of that, something felt unstable. And deep down, I knew it. The biggest issue was that I had no real budgeting system. Back home, structure came naturally because life was expensive enough to force discipline. But in Mexico, lower prices created this illusion that I didn't need to track things as carefully. So instead of managing my finances intentionally, I just reacted to whatever happened each week. If friends invited me somewhere, I went. If I wanted delivery, I ordered it. If I found a better apartment or a fun weekend trip, I justified it because everything still felt cheaper than the US, but over time, that lack of structure started catching up to me. I wasn't building routines, savings goals, or long-term stability. I was simply living reactively, making emotional decisions based on comfort, convenience, and temporary excitement. And honestly, that lifestyle feels sustainable at first because moving abroad itself feels exciting enough to distract you from deeper problems. Then one night, after reviewing my finances again, I finally admitted something to myself. At some point, I realized I wasn't building a life. I was just drifting through one. That realization forced me to ask harder questions. Why does this still feel financially stressful? Why doesn't this feel sustainable? And surprisingly, the answer completely changed how I think about living abroad. You'll want to know what that answer is. Trust me, I realized I was wrong about Mexico the moment I stopped blaming the country and started looking at my own habits. It wasn't because Mexico is expensive. It's because I made the mistake of thinking a cheaper country automatically creates a cheaper life. I assumed geography would fix my finances, but in reality, nothing about my spending behavior actually changed. What I didn't understand at the time was simple but powerful. I didn't know that lifestyle determines cost. The kind of neighborhoods I chose, the restaurants I frequented, the activities I said yes to, all of it shaped how much I ended up spending, regardless of the country. I didn't know that expectations shape spending either. Once I expected comfort, convenience, and familiarity, my budget naturally expanded to match those expectations. And I definitely didn't know that convenience destroys budgets. The easier something felt, delivery apps, ride shares, cafes, imported goods, the less I questioned the price and the faster small expenses piled up. Moving abroad doesn't solve financial problems if your lifestyle habits stay the same. That's the part I had to learn the hard way. I brought my old spending patterns into a new country and expected different results, but money doesn't work that way. So if I could do it all over again, here's what I'd change. The 3 rules I'd follow moving abroad again. First, build your lifestyle before your budget. Don't start with numbers. Start with how you actually want to live day to day. Second, test cities before committing. Avoid emotional decisions based on vacation energy or online content. Spend time living in different areas before locking anything in. And third, track lifestyle inflation immediately, because comfort spending doesn't feel dangerous in the moment. It compounds quietly over time. The truth is, the people who save money abroad aren't chasing cheap. They're intentional about lifestyle. And that's the real lesson I took away from living in Mexico. It can absolutely be affordable. It can be rewarding, exciting, and even life-changing. But only if you avoid the mistakes that quietly make it expensive. If you want more tips on living and planning your life overseas, check out our other videos to help you start your journey with confidence.